So I was talking to a friend, and he was reading this book, and he was telling me that it's about systematic theology. And in that, he referenced that systematic theology is biblical. But then we were talking a little bit later, and he told me about biblical theology. And I was like, isn't all theology biblical? What about systematic theology? I thought you just said that was biblical. What am I supposed to do with these two things, biblical theology and systematic theology? And what's the difference? These are two various tools that theologians, even normal everyday Christians, have to use in order to both understand the Bible well, to understand themselves well, and to understand the world that they live in well. So, here are how these two tools work. I'm taking this definition from one particular theologian whose name was Gerhardus Voss. He lived at the end of the 1800s into the early 1900s. He was a professor at Princeton Seminary, and he gives this definition. Biblical theology is linear. It's drawing a line starting in one place and working out through until another place. Systematic theology is cyclical. It works a circle. So, we'll come at it this way. Take any sort of doctrine you want, and you can do a biblical theology of it, and you can do a systematic theology of it. So, let's take, for instance, the doctrine of atonement. If you were to do a biblical theology of the doctrine of the atonement, you would start at the beginning of what does the atonement have to do with the very beginning of the Bible, and see the implications throughout the rest of the Bible. So, take something like Genesis chapter 3. God creates everything well in Genesis 1 and 2. The fall happens in Genesis 3. At the end of Genesis 3, after the Lord has pronounced these curses and the implications of the fall, the Lord takes away their fig leaf clothes, and he takes an animal and he slaughters it, and he covers Adam and Eve with the skins from that animal. And this is a subtle picture of a coming day where the head of the serpent will be crushed by the seed of the woman. And so there's this small picture of this covering, this bloody sacrifice, death, in fact, in order to cover the wrongfulness, the exposure of fallen mankind. You see this develop a little bit further. Leviticus chapter 16, this great day of atonement where the priests will offer up sacrifice on behalf of the people of Israel, and they'll go into the Holy of Holies and intercede on behalf of the people and lay before this sacrifice and scatter the blood upon the altar and the Ark of the Covenant. And in doing so, paint once more this promised picture that someone will come and die, the blood sacrifice that atones for sin. You see this picked up further along in Isaiah 52 and 53. But this time, it's not a lamb that's being sacrificed, but it's a man who is stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. He bears the grief of the people. For their transgressions he is pierced, the text says. But this is a mysterious figure, someone who has not arrived yet. Interestingly enough, though, he's both priest and the sacrifice, the sacrificer and the sacrificed one, both at the same time. Finally, we see the culmination of this doctrine of atonement in the person and work of Jesus, who is the Lamb that was slain for the sins of the world. And the crucifixion is the implication of that. So all of those small pictures were leading up to that moment that paints this redemptive story. And then you can study Paul, and he talks about the implications of the atonement and the benefits that we have in being united to Christ. That's a biblical theology of the atonement. It started at the beginning and it's worked through until the end. A systematic theology, though, would come at it more like this. Let's define atonement. We'll look at some various words. Maybe Hebrew words and Greek words and see what those words mean. We'll study some various texts to highlight. Leviticus 16 would certainly be one. You could turn to all sorts of places in the Gospels for others, and you look at some of the minute details, but then you ask the question, okay, how now does atonement relate to our doctrine of Christ? And how does it relate to our doctrine of salvation? And so it paints this little wheel to talk about the web that is theology, how all of these various doctrines are all actually interlinked and then applied to the everyday person's life. We are now able, systematic theology would be able to say, to come before God not any longer as those who are wayward and far from God, but those who are united to Christ, who are justified in Him, who are adopted, and now have this great high priest who ever lives to make intercession. And so it's with those two categories of biblical theology and systematic theology that now the Christian is really equipped to come to whatever part of the Bible and whatever part of the Christian life, whatever part of reality, and see the world through that framework, what we call a biblical worldview. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed this content, like and subscribe. And if you want a deeper dive on the various things that we talk about, check out our podcast For the Church.